Hello and welcome to another episode of Sushi and the Swordfish. I'm Sushi, and you're joining me for our April look at the movies I watched in 2021. So April was also another quite jam-packed month for movies, as you can see just from the video here. So we're going to jump right in. All right, so looking at our 5 different categories here, you can see that we have a lot to get to. So first movie we have here is 13 Assassins, and this is a Japanese movie. It kind of follows similar to The Seven Samurai in some ways. If I recall, I believe this is some other traditional story or something similar. It was quite brutal in a lot of parts. It's quite action heavy, but also some very violent deaths and stuff in this movie. Not bad. It was pretty interesting, and I think it was kind of almost, as I said, the flow of the film felt a lot similar to Seven Samurai. I think I'm going to put it in. I'm debating. I'm going to go with OK USA. Again, may not be a type of film for everyone. Next, we have 47 Ronin. As you can see, the picture's kind of cut off there, unfortunately, but that's okay. So 47 Ronin was a Keanu Reeves film. I can't remember exactly when this came out. Must be the early 2010s. This movie got completely panned. A lot of people said it was terrible. I didn't think it was terrible. There's parts of it that are really weird and dull, but the costumes were really, really well done. Some of the action was really cool. Some of the computer graphics they don't stand the test of time, shall we say. But as a whole, I thought the movie was fine. I think it's kind of slagged on maybe a little bit more than it might need to be. I'm not too sure what people were expecting of this movie. Next, we have a Disney classic from that previous mentioned in that other video, was that golden era that a lot of people fondly remember. Aladdin is one of those movies that a lot of people like. I'm going to put in the big money, big prizes, I love it category. The Robin Williams genie character is very, very iconic, very well played. Lots of really funny gags in this. Still pretty funny to this day if you see some of them. And it was just a fun story, a little bit different than some of the other traditional Disney fairy tales. Next, we have a WWE documentary. I think it was in conjunction with HBO, if I recall. And this is the Andre the Giant, Bigger Than You Remember, I think is the full title. It was okay. It didn't really do too much out of the ordinary, what you might expect. It was interesting to see some people such as Vince McMahon on there, and he's not somebody that kind of pops up in a lot of these movies, but I think he had a really strong relationship with Andre, and even he gets choked up pretty late in the documentary. I forget what exactly it is, but I think he just had such a strong bond with him, and so he fondly remembers him. So, and it was just kind of cool, and it had a whole bunch of different matches and stuff, which was a nice little bonus that you could go through on some of those things in there too. Next, we have another Disney Golden Age or era film, Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast goes in the top dog category for me. I really, really like this movie. I can't really put my finger on what it is I like about the movie, but it's just got a really good flow. Excellent villain in Gaston, who's likable for all the wrong reasons. Like, he's such a slime ball, but he's likable when he's on screen because you just want to see him get his comeuppance at some point. And the Beast character goes through that whole arc. Belle she doesn't quite break the mold of the traditional princess. However, she's I guess bold or daring enough that she's not completely helpless all of the time. And the other characters in the film are really likable that you see in the picture there. Cogsworth, Lumiere, I think it's Mrs. Potts, if I remember. And there's a few others. One of the ones I like the most that I don't even think have a name, is the Coat Rack, who ends up like boxing a guy near the end of the movie, and he's playing like the violin during the title theme song of Beauty and the Beast. And if I recall, Pixar actually did, as well as for Aladdin, Pixar, I believe, worked on some of the CG components of the movie, and they're kind of like blink and you'll miss that they're actually CG parts in the films. I can't remember how they did it or what they did exactly, but I do believe they worked on both movies. And Beauty and the Beast would be in the ballroom scene, and I think for Aladdin it's during the Cave of Wonder sequence as it's erupting when all the lava and stuff's coming out. Next we have Birdman. I'm not going to remember that whole title. Birdman was interesting. Like it was a neat film. It was supposed to basically be like all one timeline. No cuts that basically said like here's a jump in time or anything. It was basically we starting at one point and it just goes through this entire sequence all at once essentially. And Michael Keaton is great in this movie. A lot of comparisons to him as Batman from the 80s. It was an interesting movie for sure, and it's pretty well acted. And Edward Norton plays like an interesting character who you kind of really want to dislike, but he's really not like that terrible. But it's just interesting. It was a neat movie, and some of the parts where they're on stage and when they're I think it's Edward Norton comes on stage and he kind of morphs his all of his lines and starts ad-libbing and stuff, and it kind of sets them off. And it's interesting. It's a neat movie. I'm gonna put it in the. I'm actually gonna put it in the Big Money, Big Prizes. I love it. I think I'd heard a lot of acclaim for the movie, but didn't know what to expect just from the trailer alone. But it was good. All right, we have what many feel is a comedy classic in Blazing Saddles. I don't have much to say about Blazing Saddles. I'm putting it in the OK USA category. I just thought it was okay. There are some, again, racial undertones in this movie that might not be considered appropriate now. I don't know, like if you want to look at this because it's supposed to be so comedic and it's supposed to be so obnoxious. That's why they kind of, I think they can kind of get away with it, if you will. But it just didn't work for me personally. I didn't really find it amusing or funny. And there's a few funny gags for sure. But as a whole, not a movie that I really thought was that great. Next we have Coco. Okay, I'm going to throw Coco right into the Big Money, Big Prizes, I Love It category. I liked Coco a lot. I like the colors. They really represent the sort of land of the dead really well in this movie. I thought it was a neat setting to choose Mexico, and the characters are really likable. Hector's a really interesting character. Miguel is a really interesting character, and their dynamic together and as they discover more about each other is really neat. I like this movie a lot. I thought the music was cool. I would recommend it. It seems to kind of fly under the radar a little bit for the Pixar films. I think there might have been some interest before it came out, but then it's sort of faded away, it feels a little bit. So I think it was worth watching though. Next we have The Color of Money, which actually is going to couple down here with The Hustler as well. But The Color of Money is technically, I don't even know if it's technically, it might actually just be considered the direct sequel to The Hustler. Paul Newman does play the same character in the film, and this movie's really well done. It's just, I believe Scorsese is the director, and it's an interesting look at this character, Paul Newman's character, who was this hotshot guy in The Hustler, and fell on his hard times in life, and just kind of backed away from the world of hustling people as a pool player. And then he kind of gets back into it and he joins this tournament, and it's really neat. I thought it was really cool. And if you see this movie first and then The Hustler, you might have a hard time going back because the pacing of the movies are nothing alike. This one definitely has a more modern sensibility to it. So if you're going to watch them, I would recommend The Hustler first. But I'm going to put The Color of Money up here as Big Money, Big Prizes, and I Love It. All right, next we have Cowboy Bebop. This is a animated movie, obviously, that falls into the Cowboy Bebop timeline. It actually cuts through the television series. I think it's episode 17, 18. It doesn't really matter very much, honestly. Just the format of the Cowboy Bebop series, you can kind of watch them pretty much any way you want, the way they've cut them. And they all sort of have different cinema themes or music themes, and music plays a heavy part of the series, from the titles of the episodes to just the actual music that's presented by Yoko Kanno. I thought this movie was okay. I didn't love it. I think I enjoy the television series a little bit more. This just felt as if it was one much longer episode. Um, if you broke this up into 3 parts, it could have been 3 episodes or whatever. The animation looks good. The main villain is interesting. He's kind of the dark side of our main hero, Spike Spiegel. And there's a really great fight sequence where Spike's using a broom during the fight, and that's really cool. But the train sequence is quite good as well. There's a number of really good sequences in the film, but as a whole, I didn't find it as interesting, I think, as just a 30-minute or 22-minute episode. So I'm going to put it in the OK USA category. Next we have the Mickey and the Beanstalk. So this is a pretty classic animated Disney film, a short film, I suppose. This particular DVD had a few other animated, I don't know, films, I guess, in it as well. But the primary part of the collection was the Mickey and the Beanstalk. This is a classic for a lot of people. Like, this is really something that many kids will probably enjoy. It's basically just, Jack and the Beanstalk, but it has Mickey along with Donald and Goofy. And I still remember even seeing this. I don't even know how old this is, but seeing this as a kid, the sequence where the beanstalk ends up growing through their house, and when they're going up to the top, they're all asleep. And it's just funny how they don't end up falling down back to earth, because the beanstalk is growing so fast and it keeps catching them from falling, and they're sliding around and stuff. It's a really neat sequence. Okay, next we have Clint Eastwood in High Plains Drifter, and this is a really interesting Western because it kind of goes against the archetype in some ways. There is a specific element of this film that is not explicitly said, however, it's heavily implied several times. And even by the end, you will probably feel a certain way or think a certain way, but it's still never completely put out there that this is what's occurred. And Clint Eastwood is pretty despicable in this. He's kind of borderline psychotic, and his personality is so magnetic on screen, so you can't help but sort of want to root for him. But the things he starts doing, and it's right at the start of the movie, right away, really, you see this sequence that happens, and you think, whoa, what is going on here? So it was interesting to see that he's not just playing the standard hero, no name hero, walks into town and does the job that everyone needs to get done. There's that element that's there, but then there's another piece that kind of mixes another genre into the Western genre. And then on top of that, Clint Eastwood's playing not so nice a character. There's parts of this movie that kind of feel a little bit vague to me since I watched it so long ago. So I'm debating putting it between the two categories. And there's parts that make it really uncomfortable, which again is probably on purpose. So I think I'm going to give it a bit of an edge because it does provide something different. Next we have Kung Fu Killer. Not too much to say here. It's okay USA. There's a couple of really cool fights in it. Basically, this character has a reason to come after other martial artists and wants to beat them kind of at their own game until Donnie Yen steps in. They have a really cool fight scene. Like, there's traffic flowing between the two of them as they're fighting in the middle of a street in Hong Kong under a bridge. And I can't imagine the choreography, how hard that must have been. But the flow of the plot is a little bit dull outside of the fights. And yes, generally speaking, you don't watch a martial arts movie for the story, but sometimes if that element is key to what sets up those fights, and you don't have that emotional investment, it just doesn't feel as engaging. So I'm going to put it in the OK USA category. Mulan. So Mulan is kind of a forgotten Disney film in a lot of ways. I think this character is kind of on the cusp of that part of the princess line, but not really part of the princess line, kind of more in the action hero line, but not quite. So I think this kind of puts Mulan in a strange category. I think Mulan is okay. I don't. I think there's a reason it's not super memorable, because even though the character is really likable, a lot of what's going on around here is just kind of boring. It just doesn't really give a grandiose sense, I suppose. There are really fun characters in the movie and so forth, but I think outside of Mulan herself, the other characters don't have as much to do. And Mulan's character arc is actually really fun to go through and follow, and might have some level of sensibility to today's sort of climate of the world, just understanding gender roles and so forth, and the changing of gender roles. And she kind of is able to change her course of her destiny by making a big decision in her life. And I think that's a really interesting story for sure, but it almost ends abruptly too. It just sort of feels, just as you start to see some more stuff happening and outside of her training, and it just sort of feels like all of the main pieces fall into place really rather quickly. Okay, My Fair Lady. I had a hard time getting through this movie, to be honest. It from a again, from a filmmaking standpoint, the costumes are absolutely amazing. The clothing that they put together, the some of the set pieces when Audrey Hepburn has been trained or conditioned to be a proper socialite, whatever the sort of goal is in this. She enters some of these fantastic ballrooms, and just all of the dresses and the attire of everybody is just unbelievable. This is another movie that does have a split uh, break between it. So we watch the first half, and then there's a session break, and then you get into the second half. I really struggled to get through this movie. I watched it all the way through. I don't know how, because it was not, I'm probably not the intended audience, nor did I just find the humor interesting. It's basically a musical. There's a lot of music. I don't tend to gravitate towards musicals. It's a very well liked movie, but I have to put it in the stink category for me. It was just very long and drawn out, and just again, there's some uncomfortable things in this movie. Just treatment of women as a whole. Just this sort of, I understand this is a time period piece, but I did not enjoy those aspects of the film whatsoever. All right, and then Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest with Cary Grant. This is yeah, this I'm gonna put this up here. The big money, big prizes, and I love it. Although there's some, I don't know, movie magic that just doesn't look magical anymore. It's so evident that there's a green screen, or it's so evident that it's a model of a building or whatever. Aside from those pieces, this is a really fun, intense chase movie, where it's again a bit of the whodunit aspect, but it's just a full-on chase movie, and obviously the iconic sequence of him out in the cornfield and the plane chasing him down, and to get up to that point is interesting, where he's in the truck and it breaks down and he's running in the field, and everyone's just out to get him basically. And when he's in the airport and the train stations and things like that, and he has to fool people by saying different names and stuff. It's interesting, and all the mistaken identities and so forth. And there are some really cool set pieces, like he goes to the UN and this and that. I think it's an interesting movie. Again, I would assume that this is very high on the list of films for film students and film studies, and there's a good reason for that. Next is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'm kind of debating if this goes in the Big Money, Big Prizes, I Love It category or in the OK USA. I think I'm going to put it in the OK USA category. Brad Pitt was really good in this movie. I believe he was nominated for a number of awards for his performance. He's really good in this movie, and the other actors are just fine too, right? And if you have Tarantino dialogue and you get somebody to really buy in, it's likely to come across as as a film goer as a really catchy, snappy dialogue. Um, it's but just as a whole, I thought the movie was okay. Like it's interesting. It's but I think there's other Tarantino films that kind of have a bit more um, grandiose nature to them. This one's a little bit more subdued, and I think I heard some people really enjoyed that because it was kind of a seemed a bit out of the Tarantino realm of the high intensity action, and it just focused a bit more on the character development. So I heard some people really enjoy that, and some people on the other end of the spectrum. I like to have a balance of both, but I guess if I had to choose, I also really enjoy the action sequences a bit more if that were possible to have. But this story doesn't really allow for that, just the type of story that it was. Um, but it's still interesting to kind of see what was happening in quote unquote Hollywood in at this time frame, and yeah, like just Tarantino does a good job of interlacing real world characters or real world people with people that are assumed to be, I guess in this world. He places these I don't know if you want to call them fake, but he places his characters into the world of these real people and does so pretty seamlessly. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm going to put this in Big Money, Big Prizes. I love it. I thought this was an interesting movie for sure. Nurse Ratched is often considered one of the best villains in a movie ever, and Jack Nicholson plays this role really well. He he just seems like such an unhinged personality, like around this time, anyways. So when he's on set, I assume it might have been hard to tell if he was playing his character or not. I don't know, a lot about him obviously, but I just thought it was interesting. His character changes very minimally. It feels like from the start of the film to the end, aside from a very important piece at the very end. However, like he's so carefree and doesn't necessarily believe that he belongs in this asylum, and pretty much right to the end doesn't believe it. So it's interesting. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This was a fun movie. This is there's a lot of just ridiculousness happening in this movie. John Candy, basically being completely positive about every single thing that happens, and Steve Martin being the absolute opposite, the total pessimist about everything that's going on. Most people in the world would be in the Steve Martin character's frame of mind. I think that's what makes the movie fun, as they're both trying to achieve this goal of getting home, with completely different attitudes of what that looks like, and just it's stolen credit cards, lost money, it's sleeping in dirty old motels and things like that. It's funny. I think it's relatable in a lot of ways, when you're stressed out with the holidays and trying to get things done. So I think it's a fun movie. Snowpiercer, again, I'm going to put this up here for Big Money, Big Prizes. I love it. There were really interesting aspects of this with the post-apocalyptic world piece, with the sort of class system that's going on this train. The end kind of falls apart a little bit. Like I don't know if it's the big reveal, or it's not really a huge reveal or anything, but I just found like the tail end kind of didn't really. I don't know. I don't know what they could have done, I suppose, to make things any more exciting or whatever, but it just kind of, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a letdown, but you don't know what to expect when you get to that point, and then when you do, it just sort of, it fizzles out a little bit. The very, very end is interesting. The last shots of the film, And the lead up to that last, whatever it is, 20 minutes or so, is quite exciting and interesting as well. Next we have Tangled. Tangled is a weird movie for me because it took some time for this to grow on me. I would have easily put it in the stink category, but after kind of thinking about it some more, and um, I've listened to some of the songs again a little bit after, I think this is actually a stronger movie than I gave it credit for at the start. There's some really fun action sequences in here. And again, I think I didn't really give it its due when it came to its soundtrack. Its soundtrack is actually not bad. It's fairly strong. Um, it's not one of the top Disney movies for myself and probably most, but it's worth a watch. It's kind of follows some of the traditional um, fairy tale notes, but adds a little bit of twists here and there too. Okay, next we have Jean-Claude Van Damme in The Bouncer. This is going in the OK USA, appropriately OK USA category. A bit of an underrated movie, I think. Jean-Claude Van Damme is a weird actor because we hear a lot of the stuff about him being, whether it's self-centered, arrogant, just kind of an intense personality. And typically a lot of people feel like his movies are throwaways, right? They're action movies or whatever, but there's no good acting. He's surprised me a few times. Like he's actually done some decent acting work in a few of his films, and he actually has a bit more range than you might realize. And this movie was decent. Like it's an interesting movie that just shows probably potentially a place where he might even be in his life, just with his age and him trying to do what's best for his daughter, and taking on work that he probably at his age and just for the time should be giving up at this point, but he's continuing to do this because he won't give up the dream of his daughter, or won't give up the importance of giving her what's better than whatever he had. So I think that's kind of the key aspect of the movie. And he doesn't talk a lot in this movie, and some people are, well, that's because he's a bad actor or whatever. But it's his emotion that we can see from him without having to say anything. It's his body placement within a scene, like where he stands. Now I know that's partly due to direction, but the actor has to follow through with that while being on film. So I think it was okay. I think it's an interesting film. Next we have The Hustler. So I actually think The Hustler is a step down from The Color of Money. Some people might disagree and might think it's a strong movie. The first bit of the movie really focuses on the pool part. And then after this initial piece of playing pool, that aspect is pretty well taken away from the rest of the film. I mean, it's still a little bit here and there, but after you get this huge piece of playing pool against, was it Minnesota Fats? It's sort of like it's in the background until the very end of the movie. But it's interesting because Paul Newman's character is basically thinks he's this hotshot pool player, so he tells Minnesota Fats like, I can beat you easily. I can beat you, and he wins the first few matches that they play together. But he gets worn down. Like they play for hours and hours and hours and hours, and Paul Newman just looks completely exhausted by the end. It's interesting to watch that aspect, and then it shows like some of his relationships and so forth after, which come back in an aspect in The Color of Money, which is really cool. And again, probably not intentional at the time, at all, I would assume. However, they kind of pull that back together, and that's where if you see The Hustler, to see that trajectory of what happens to him by the time you get to The Color of Money is really cool. All right, and then the last is The Raid. Really cool action movie. Not a lot to say here. This is going in the big money, big prizes. I love it. I really enjoyed this movie a lot. It had a lot of fanfare, really amazing action. some of the fights in this and the way they end is just absolutely brutal. It looks, I mean, there's a nice flair to everything that's happening, but there's at least some edge of grittiness or reality that's still based in there. Yes, there's still a bit of maybe wire work and things like that, but um, like these actors, they put everything into it. Like there's no question that they went all in on this, and there's probably a lot of people who got hurt on set at some point. So very enjoyable movie if you want a nice, really quick, tight action, especially martial arts movie. The Raid is definitely one you'd want to check out. Okay, and with that, we're going to wrap up our April 2021 films. Thanks for joining me on this aspect so far, and we still got a little bit to go, so we'll catch you down that road.